History is filled with larger-than-life figures, emperors who reigned for decades, built empires, and left legacies that echo through time. We all know Augustus, Caesar, Constantine. But what about the ones who barely made a ripple? The footnotes of history, the emperors whose reigns were so short, they were almost forgotten. Today, we read diving deep into one of the most bizarre and mysterious stories from the Roman Empire, the tale of an emperor who ruled for just 2 months, and then vanished without a trace. This is the story of Gordian I and Gordian II, a father and son duo whose rise and fall is one of the most dramatic tales you've probably never heard. Our story begins in the year 238 AD, a period known as the crisis of the 3rd century. The Roman Empire was in turmoil. It was a time of civil war, foreign invasion, plague, and economic collapse. Emperors were rising and falling so quickly it was hard to keep track. The average lifespan of an emperor during this period wasn't long, and their deaths were rarely from natural causes. The man on the throne at the start of our story was Maximinus Thrax. Now Maximinus was not your typical Roman emperor. He was a Thracian peasant, a giant of a man, said to be over 8 feet tall, who had risen through the ranks of the army purely on military merit. He was a soldier's soldier, tough, brutal, and completely uninterested in the politics of Rome. He never even set foot in the city during his entire reign. His focus was on the frontier, fighting Germanic tribes. But wars are expensive. To fund his campaigns, Maximinus squeezed the empire for every last denarius. He doubled taxes, confiscated the wealth of the rich, and plundered temple treasures. This, as you can imagine, didn't make him very popular, especially with the senatorial class, the wealthy aristocrats who felt their power and purses being threatened. The people were suffering, the nobility was furious, and the entire empire was a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark came from the Roman province of Africa, what is now modern-day Tunisia and Libya. A group of wealthy landowners, pushed to their breaking point by Maximinus's tax collectors, decided they'd had enough. They staged a rebellion. They assassinated the local procurator and, needing a figurehead for their revolt, turned to the provincial governor, an elderly, respected, and incredibly wealthy senator named Marcus Antonius Gorgianus Sempronianus Romanus Africanus. We'll just call him Gordian. Gordian was in his late 70s, possibly even 80 years old. He was a man of letters, a poet, and a diplomat who had enjoyed a long and distinguished career. He was the very picture of an old-school Roman aristocrat. The last thing he wanted was to be emperor. He had seen what happened to emperors, but the rebels were insistent. They surrounded his house, they cheered for him, they threatened him. It was an offer he literally couldn't refuse. So, reluctantly, Gordian accepted the imperial purple. But he made one condition. He was too old to rule alone. He insisted that his son, also named Gordian, be made his co-emperor. The son, Gordian II, was in his mid-40s. Like his father, he was well-educated and popular, though he had a reputation for enjoying a life of luxury a bit too much. The people of Africa hailed them both as emperors, and the rebellion was officially on. They'd minted coins with their portraits and sent a delegation to Rome to announce the news and seek the Senate as support. When the news reached Rome, the Senate was ecstatic. They despised Maximinus Thrax and saw the Gordians as a return to a more civilized, aristocratic rule. They quickly declared their support for the father and son emperors, and, for good measure, declared Maximinus an enemy of the state. The people of Rome celebrated in the streets, tearing down statues of Maximinus and killing his officials. It seemed like a new, brighter era was dawning. For a few glorious weeks, the Gordians were the toast of the empire. They represented hope, a return to tradition, and an end to the brutal military rule of Maximinus Thrax. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They had the support of the Senate, the people of Rome, and the province of Africa, but they didn't have the army. Or at least, not all of it. While Maximinus was up north with the main legions, the neighboring province of Numidia had a legion loyal to him, commanded by a governor named Capelianus. And here's where the drama really kicks in. Capelianus and the younger Gordian had a long-standing personal grudge, stemming from a past lawsuit. So, for Capelianus this wasn't just about loyalty to Maximinus, it was personal. As soon as he heard about the rebellion, Capelianus marched his single, battle-hardened legion, the Legio III Augusta, towards Carthage, the capital of Africa, where the Gordians were based. The Gordians had to scramble to defend themselves. The problem was, they didn't have a professional army. Their forces consisted of a hastily assembled local militia, citizen volunteers who were no match for trained Roman legionaries. Gordian II, despite his lack of military experience, took command and led his makeshift army out to meet Capelianus in battle. The result was a massacre. The Battle of Carthage was a complete disaster for the Gordians. Their militia was cut to pieces, and Gordian II was killed in the fighting. His body was never even recovered. When news of the defeat and his son's death reached the elderly Gordian I back in Carthage, he was devastated. He had been emperor for just 21 days. Realizing all was lost, the old man took his own life. And just like that, the glorious rebellion was over. The two emperors who had represented so much hope were gone. One dead in a battle he never should have fought, the other by his own hand, broken by grief. A reign that had started with such promise had ended in tragedy in less than a month. It was one of the shortest and most disastrous reigns in Roman history. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. Back in Rome, the Senate was now in a terrifying position. They had openly defied Maximinus' threats, declared him an enemy, and supported the now-dead Gordians. They knew Maximinus, who was now marching his formidable army down towards Italy, would show them no mercy. In a desperate act of self-preservation, the Senate did something unprecedented. They elected two of their own, Pupienus and Balbinus, as co-emperors to lead the defense of Italy, and to appease the Roman populace who had been fond of the Gordians. They also appointed Gordian, the first young grandson, a 13-year-old boy, also named Gordian, as Caesar, or junior emperor. This boy would become Gordian III. So now, in the year 238, known as the year of the six emperors, you had Maximinus marching on Rome, two new emperors chosen by the Senate, and a boy Caesar waiting in the wings. It was absolute chaos. Maximinus besieged the city of Aquilare in northern Italy, but the city held out bravely, inspired by the leadership of Pupienus and Balbinus. Frustrated by the lack of progress and dwindling supplies, Maximinus's own soldiers, the very men who had put him in power, turned on him. They assassinated him and his son and sent their heads to Rome. You'd think this would be a happy ending, right? The tyrant is dead. But this is the crisis of the 3rd century, and happy endings are in short supply. The two new emperors, Pupienus and Balbinus, returned to Rome in triumph, but they immediately began to argue and plot against each other. They distrusted one another completely. One was a military man, the other an administrator, and they couldn't agree on anything. The Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers who were supposed to protect the emperors, also hated them because they had been chosen by the Senate, not by the army. Just a few months after taking power, while the city was distracted by the Capitoline Games, the Praetorian Guard stormed the palace. They found the two emperors arguing, seized them, stripped them, dragged them through the streets, and murdered them. Then, they found the young boy, Gordian III, the grandson of the original Gordian. They proclaimed him the sole emperor of the Roman Empire. He was just 13 years old, and so, the legacy of the two Gordians who ruled for only 21 days lived on through their young grandson. Gordian III would go on to rule for 6 years, a relatively stable period in the midst of chaos, before he too was likely murdered by his own soldiers during a campaign in Persia. The story of Gordian I and II is a perfect snapshot of the chaos of their time. It's a story of ambition, reluctance, hope, and tragedy. Two men, a father and son, thrust into a role they didn't want, who tried to stand against a tyrant and paid the ultimate price. Their reign was a mere flash in the pan, a blip on the timeline of Roman history, lasting barely 3 weeks. And yet, their rebellion set in motion a chain of events that led to the downfall of one emperor and the rise of 3 more, including their own grandson. They weren't just a footnote. They were the catalyst for one of the most chaotic years in Roman history. A reminder that sometimes, even the briefest moments can change the course of an empire. Thank you so much for watching. It's these kinds of hidden stories that make history so fascinating. If you enjoyed this deep dive into a forgotten corner of the Roman Empire, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the past. Let me know in the comments which obscure historical event you'd like to hear about next. See you in the next video.